Tansel from Mystic, Connecticut. I've been teaching here at the Wooden Boat School for 14 years. This is my daughter Evelyn. She's the third generation in my family to come along in this business. We're both working on the restoration of the whale ship Charles W. Morgan at Mystic Seaport. We're Mystic Seaport shipyard employees, and I get a leave of absence to come up here and teach. I'm teaching for 3 weeks this year, teaching a dory building class, Grand Banks 20-foot dory, and also starting a 5-year steam launch restoration class. We thought we'd talk to you a little bit about our dory project, and in particular caulking the bottom. Now, caulking is an ancient trade and often misunderstood. The hull planking on boats is fitted fairly tightly together, edge to edge, but to keep the water out, you have to put cotton in between the seams, and there's a bit of an art to putting in the cotton. We were using rollers and also caulking iron and caulking mallet on the dory, and those being very wide and dry pine planks were being rather gentle. The caulking seam was open about 1/8 of an inch out on the outside on a 1-inch bottom, wood to wood on the inside, and we put the cotton in gently, so we had no cotton coming through the inside, none of those puffy cumulus clouds, and we had the cotton set in about 1/8 of an inch on the outside so that putty could be put over the top. Very important that you put a layer of oil-based paint between the cotton and the putty so that you have a barrier there to keep the cotton from sucking the oil out of the putty. We are also involved right now in Mystic in caulking the bottom of the whale ship, which is 3-inch thick oak, very different scale. And Evelyn has been learning how to caulk on that ship, and we'll just talk to you about that briefly so you get an idea of the contrast.
Yeah, so what you saw us running on the dory was just cotton, but in a larger boat, and oftentimes in the small boats too, you end up just using the pizza rollers. Those little rollers are enough. The caulking mallets and irons you'll see much more in use on larger scale vessels. So right now with this project in the Morgan, we're running cotton and also oakum, which is used to be hemp and pine tar, although today we're not really sure what the oil in there is. It's got a very distinctive smell though. It's wonderful to work with, and that oily, the oily nature of the oakum does make it a very rot resistant material. And it also adds significantly to the structural integrity of the vessel overall, because what you're doing when you're driving fiber in between all of the plank seams is you're actually providing a point of contact between each of those planks all the way up the hull. So it really does a lot to firm it up, which is why you'll also hear caulkers talking about starting out with the narrowest seams and moving in that order to the widest seams. And you'll actually find that you are able to move the planks a bit, and the widest seams will be a little less wide when you get to them. Kind of hard to move 3-inch oak on this boat that we're working on, but it's amazing how much flex there is. It's really pretty remarkable.
There are basically 2 steps in caulking, and if you look at the dory bottom while we were working, the first thing we were doing was called threading, and we were making very small, tight tucks of cotton into the seam, using a caulking iron. That was the metal thing that looked like the chisel, and the caulking mallet. So with your left hand, you're gripping the iron and tucking the cotton into the seam, and after that, you make that cotton in with an iron that's blunter, making in iron. You go back and using a rocking motion, you set in the tucks that you made in your first step. Now, with using the roller, you probably noticed that we just fed the cotton right straight into the seam, much less pressure with the roller. It's a smaller boat technique, and they used to use it for decks also. As I mentioned earlier, you can do a lot of damage to a dry hull by caulking it too hard. So with your new boat that's fitted carefully together, caulk it gently, and you'll be much better off. The really firm caulking that we've used are on larger vessels that are wet, swollen, and tight, and there you can drive the cotton quite a bit harder. Would you say something a little bit about caulking mallets?
Sure. So caulking mallets are very particular. They're balanced beautifully, and they're built so that you can swing them all day, because oftentimes people who end up caulking on larger vessels, that's mostly what they do. It's very much a specialized task. So these mallets are hardwood mallets with rings on the ends to keep them from splitting, and they have a slot cut in the top on each side, which gives them a very particular noise when you are striking a caulking iron. It's a very, very particular ring. It's very bright. And there isn't anything else in the yard that sounds quite like it. So when I was learning at Mystic, when I was first starting out, my foreman, master caulker, Rob Whalen, was teaching me how to caulk, and he wasn't watching me. He was just listening. And this is a very large boat and a very large yard. But he could hear me anywhere in the yard, and he would come over and correct my technique one way or another, because he could hear from the rhythm of the motion how well I was doing. And I was the only one who was caulking at the time, so people would come up to me at the end of the day, my dad or whoever, and say, "Oh, you sounded a little bit better today. Your rhythm sounded a little bit better." But it's a really neat thing to hear. It's something you'll only hear in these yards where they're working on big old boats, because it's somewhat of an old-fashioned sort of thing.
If you have some time in your life, you really ought to come up and join us here at the Wooden Boat School. It's a tremendous place. The projects are always interesting, and you meet tremendous people. Thank you.